Good afternoon, and I'll try to move as fast as I can. I know many of you probably have a number of questions. I know my bio sounded pretty long. That's the abbreviated version. We eliminated my preschool years. But I want to welcome all of you to California. I want to thank you for having your conference here in California, and particularly here at La Quinta. I once worked for a company, or actually I was the general counsel of a subsidiary of a company that owned this property, and it was one of the, how should I put it, the savings and loan crisis. As some of you may remember, FIREA, which was not a girl I took to a prom. It was actually a body of legislation that came out of the George Herbert Bush administration, but it resulted in our holding company having to sell this particular property, and I remember almost crying the day that the sale went through. But I didn't see Governor Brown on your agenda. I was not appointed by him. I was appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger. But I don't feel I have a problem in saying on behalf of him and the people here in California, particularly in this beautiful region of our desert, spend as much money as you absolutely can while you're here. Even if you go above your budget, we have all the major financial institutions right in the area. You might want to avoid Chase, but beyond that, I would say spend it all and help our economy here. And let me get to our discussion so that we'll have time for questions. Is this the red button, I take it? Okay, let's see how we... Oh, right here. Okay, there we go. Okay. Tom had mentioned Assembly Bill 32, which was actually authored by Fran Pavley, a legislator who's now in the California Senate from the Los Angeles area, and at that time, Speaker of the Assembly, Fabian Nunez, which was viewed as the most aggressive state effort to approach or attack climate change, or what is viewed as the man-made impacts on climate change. I'm not here to argue the science. I'm going to say what Newt Gingrich said once on the Charlie Rose show. Whether you believe in the science of climate change or not, reducing carbon in the atmosphere, reducing particulate in the atmosphere, reducing mercury, all of the things that I believe the EPA is advancing are good things. But anyway, AB 32 was signed in 2006 by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and from that came a myriad of other legislations. It was a major, major event. The governor liked doing things big. We had British Prime Minister Tony Blair. We had Branson, the owner of Virgin America, George Clooney, a number of other big stars that went around the state. A point I always like to make, this was before horizontal drilling or horizontal fracking, or hydraulic fracking, horizontal hydraulic fracking became in place. Natural gas has had a major impact on this. But the most ambitious energy standard in the country was actually set in 2002 by a Senator Scheer. He was also the senator, by the way, who, Senate Bill 1078, who put forth the laws that created the restructuring of California's energy markets, which resulted in what I used to call the California energy crisis, but I know some other states and actually some folks up in Canada that said it was actually a Western energy crisis. We can't take full credit for it. But under this particular bill, it required retail sellers to begin to convert their portfolios or their energy portfolios to renewable energy with a goal of reaching 20% by 2010. Later on, Senator Simitian out of Palo Alto, California, relatively liberal area of the state, but it's also, by the way, right there at Stanford, the home of the Hoover Institute, which many of you probably read many of their great works that come out of there. But anyway, Senator Simitian wrote Senate Bill 21X. This is not an algebra class. And this increased California's renewable goals from a legislative mandate from 20 to 33%. And this involved a number of target portions. Now, that target part of the Senate Bill 12X actually came from the California Public Utilities Commission in a decision that was drafted and voted on by us, but it was drafted by my fellow Commissioner Mark Farron. Let me say here that in these slides and in my remarks, none of this represents the California Public Utilities Commission, we only really can mandate what we vote on. It's my personal view that when I speak, it should stand for the California Public Utilities Commission, but many of you as legislators know you have to get your majority votes, so that's always been, in my opinion, one of the shortcomings of democracy. But under this, we have what's laid out are different compliance years when the investor-owned utilities meet their renewable portfolio standard guidelines. Here in California, that is wind, solar, biomass, and small hydro. Large hydro is not included in our RPS. If it was, we'd already probably be past our 33%. Okay. Tom had also mentioned, and I believe Ellen as well, the California Energy Commission. Here in California, we have an Energy Commission that works with the California Public Utilities Commission and other agencies. I think from a governmental standpoint, since this is a gathering of state governments, there's some distinctions that probably should be established. And I'll start with the Energy Commission. They actually come under our resources agency. So they are a commission within an agency where here in California, probably similar to most of your states, the California Public Utilities Commission is an independent constitutional agency. At least we walk around and think that we are until the legislature gets a hold of our budget and we reminded that the legislature giveth and it can take it away. But we are actually, do not have an agency that's over us. The president of our commission, Michael Peavy, has a dotted line to the governor. That's pretty much it. We're an independent agency. But we share certain responsibilities with the Energy Commission in citing both generation and transmission, actually. As mentioned here, the CEC handles siting of thermal facilities that are greater than 50 megawatts. And they also assist with local jurisdictions in certain permitting aspects. And that's been a challenge here in California. It may be the same in your states, but permitting is a problem here. And I think it was encouraging to hear Tom speak about the collaborative efforts that are happening on the federal lands. But local jurisdictions, as well as our aggressive environmental laws, have made permitting of renewable energy a challenge in this state. Currently, under our procurement standards, as I mentioned, in 2010, the investor-owned utilities were mandated to have 20% procurement of their portfolios. But there was also flexible compliance, and we count the compliance as actual delivery, not the power purchase agreements or agreed upon utility-owned generation that's in place. So this table will show you the number of projects that we have in California, some of which have since been withdrawn or terminated. We'll talk about our RPS procurement process a little further on. But some point I should make clear about my great state of California, which, as you know, is here on the bleeding edge of the Pacific. Here, renewable energy is not a fuel source. It's a religion. It has a much different categorization. Okay, it's our Lady of Photovoltaic Light, church by the side of the windmill. I know it's late in the afternoon. I thought I'd get a little response here. That must have been a good lunch. I didn't make it. I am a man of faith, so I don't mean to make mockery of anything, but we are very, very serious about our renewable energy sources. But as you're witnessing here, we have some of the richest renewable energy zones in the United States, as Tom pointed out. So I don't think it's all witchcraft, but it definitely creates challenges for us as regulators to achieve the goals that have been established by the regulators. So as pointed out here, over 830 megawatts of new renewable capacity came online in 2011, and this primarily came from wind and PV, as we call it, solar voltaic. As most of you know, the price of solar voltaics, photovoltaics, excuse me, has gone down considerably. Some of it is being driven by demand. Some say most of it is being driven by subsidies by the Chinese government and other governments from manufacturing is booming in this area. I was at Solyndra when President Obama spoke about how this technology was really taken from us and exported to other countries. And today I think it's a big challenge for states to attract that manufacturing back to California. This is our capacity installed since 2003. And as you can see, currently we are at about a forecast of 2,541 megawatts. This is as of fourth quarter 2011. And our actual cumulative installations is at 1,700 megawatts, 1,702 megawatts, or 1.7 gigawatts. This also demonstrates the amount of contracting that we have under our RPS standards. As Tom pointed out, the major issue is often the viability of the contracts. What has happened in our California market is that the rush to RPS, some people feel because of the end, or to a large degree, the challenges of the feed-in tariff programs in the European Union, as well as a much more moderate RPS standard in our neighboring states. A number of companies or developers have come into California, some being viable, some speculating and working in what has become now and I'll talk about this more in our actual procurement process, but a secondary market for power purchase agreements and interconnections. So a lot of the activity you see here may not be of the best quality or ability to actually reach delivery into the load pocket. We do have a number of large projects. Bryden asked that I focus on large solar scale projects here. And by the way, I normally don't use these PowerPoint slides because my next speaker's company will use it against me in some filing that they will have before the California Public Utilities Commission. So I have to be a little careful about this. I usually just kind of reflect on what's in this troublesome mind of mine. But we have a number of large-scale approved projects that are coming into play. One is the Bright Source Ivanpah project, and along with it, the transmission line, which is the El Dorado Ivanpah, which is actually being constructed by Southern California Edison. Tom mentioned our transmission planning process here in California, which at one time was a major, major challenge for us reaching our renewable goals. I remember sitting on a panel in 2009 in Washington, D.C. at a Quinta conference on infrastructure, and my panel was involving transmission. And I had a commissioner from Colorado, Ron Benz, on one side of me, and a commissioner from Nevada on the other. And the Nevada commissioner, they were citing transmission like in about 120 days or something, with some ridiculous fast break amount. But even Colorado was citing transmission in about 190 days. And at that time, we had been involved in a 5-year process of permitting the Sunrise Power Link, which is a little south of here. We've come a long way since then. I think the state is doing much better. We have a California transmission planning group, which includes the municipals and the merchant and independent transmission operators are all at the table now, and I think the planning process has improved immensely under the leadership of both governors, bringing people to the table. The Abengoa Solar Project, well, Ivanpah is an interesting tower solar, concentrated solar type project. I think it's a really interesting technology that's going to come into play here in California. The Abengoa is actually a solar thermal project, and that's one of the concerns that I have with the sliding prices of photovoltaics, that we may have or may result in an undue concentration of a particular technology that has a high degree of variability, but in areas like this, it also can provide peak shaving capability because it is its highest intensity at peak times of the day. So each of the technologies that we're dealing with in renewables have their role in load management from a utility standpoint. The other mentioned here is the C Solar IV West. This was is the one that connects to the Sunrise Power Link project, a project that's running along the southern border of California, along the Mexican border, going through the Cleveland National Forest, actually. This was a very contentious issue. The original route was going through the Borrego Springs State Park, and Governor Schwarzenegger actually removed a couple of state park commissioners as a result of their resistance to this. One of them so happened to be his brother-in-law. So this was a pretty, and he, actually got into the Schwarzenegger-Shriver family. I remember having a public participation hearing, something we do in different areas to get public input. And it was in the Borrego Springs area, which will kind of be our California version of Taos, New Mexico, or Santa Fe, And we were having the hearing in May, and a woman came, and she, older woman, and she put her finger in all. We had 4 of our 5 commissioners there, and she put our finger in our faces and said, "How dare you hold a hearing in this community when most of my neighbors have gone to their summer homes?" And it kind of gave me a sense of the NIMBYism that you deal with in California. The other is another interesting project is the Terrigen project. This is the largest wind project in the United States right now, 1,500 megawatts of wind. There are 2 interesting components of this story as I look at Kyle Rogers from the American Gas Association and Deanna Dennis, who formerly with the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, where I chair the Committee on Natural Gas. One, the total labor force of this was about 57 at its construction peak. Wind is not for those of you that want to bring renewable projects to your states for jobs, just make sure you understand the O&M component. Some of these projects are not major job drivers. And I moderated a debate between Robert Bryce, who wrote the book Power Hungry and is with the Manhattan Institute, and a gentleman named Bracken Hendricks from the Center for American Progress, who wrote the book Lighting America's Fire with Congressman Inslee from Oregon, and is it congressman or senator?
He's running.
Congressman from Washington.
Washington. Thank you. Running for governor, Inslee, and then Van Jones, who hails here from California, is notable for another reason. But we held this debate, and Robert Bryce used this Terrigen example of what he considers to be the hype of green jobs that many of us, adopted, even though we are seeing some pickup now in California on green jobs. And he gave the statistic on how Terrigen involved 57 jobs in an operation about 12 to run the windmills. And the crowd had an astonishing gasp. And as moderating the debate, I had to mention that not only did I vote for this project, but I attended the ribbon cutting. So I'm as much a culprit in that process. But this is a very rich area for wind, and it's going to be a very, I think, a helpful addition. Then we have the issue of transmission. And as it so happens, we voted to put 200-foot towers through an area called Chino Hills, residential area that just so happens to be represented by the minority leader and a dear friend of our legislature, Bob Huff. Now, we're in settlement with the Chino Hills community now, actually in what will be a sealed settlement. And hopefully, we will vote on an outcome that will deal with the issue of when you bring transmission into communities that's carrying power that they may not benefit from. And we're very, very known for this in California with our regional states. A former NARUC commissioner, actually out of Washington, Ben Sidran, a dear friend, referred to California as the large rodent in the fight for renewable cheese in the West. And so we cause a lot of activity in the area because of our large load and our aggressive RPS policies. We also have some major transmission projects that are coming from outside the state. And this is because under our RPS program, we allow, like most of your states, out-of-state power. Now, we allow 25% of our power to come from out of state. I wrote an article on this for the National Regulatory Research Institute. It's called What Keeps Me Up at Night. It's a series of essays that regulators bring forth. And this was my concern because California is the most expensive area to do business in the United States, particularly from a generation standpoint because of our aggressive environmental laws. And we all like clean environments. We like clean water. We like all those things. And so 75% of our renewable power which is still the most expensive source of power in the country, even though it is sliding and it is declining in prices, comes from the most expensive area of the state, and then 25% comes from the more inexpensive areas of the state. Now, we just define in-state as having an interconnection with California and or a dynamic dispatch by the California Independent System Operator, which resulted in us recently approving a 150 megawatt project out of Tijuana, northern Tijuana, Mexico, called EJS. It's a wind project, and it caught a lot of opposition from labor and local politicians. But the interesting thing about the West is that the Baja is a part of the California ISO and the Western Electricity Coordinating Council. This was an SDG&E project. So it became what we call a bucket one, which was actually an in-state project, even though it was in Mexico. But here are some of the, we have the Devers number 2, which will connect, which SEC will be running to the Arizona border. We believe APS will be running the connecting line. This will be able to tap into the rich resources that we have in the Imperial Valley here in California, as well as bringing solar power in from the state of Arizona. Just a couple I want to mention here. And then here we have one that's of exceptional, I think, interest, and that's where we've had to stop construction on one particular transmission line because, as of April, it was determined that a number of nesting birds were in the region. We actually had a major delay on the Sunrise Power Link because there was a concern that a particular eagle may migrate to the region. So getting back to that, that Tehachapi line, Senator Huff once said to me, he said, "Simon, I represent the two-legged critters." So sometimes we have to, make these tough choices about who we're actually serving in public service. So here are some of our merchant transmission lines that are coming into California, again, largely with the intent of selling regional solar power, renewable power into the state. And most of these projects are currently being reviewed by their local agencies as well as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We have our investor-owned utilities actually provide 2 renewable developers what we call our interconnection sites. And as Tom mentioned, one of the challenges in any generation project is actually getting that connection to the grid, that being either transmission or distribution. Our governor, as will come up in another slide, has asked for 12,000 megawatts of distributed generation to be added to our 33% renewable goals. We define distributed generation as of now. There's no real legislation. I expect that there will be some in the pipeline as 20 megawatts or less. And so our new system is going to provide greater transparency and hopefully a better distribution of certain substations needed for maintaining the reliability in the grid system. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the SB 21X created a compliance process that we are currently, and I think I actually missed a slide too, Tom, so those things happen in our world, in our digital age. But in our, the first compliance period of 2011 to 2013, we had a very, very robust turnout. There were over 1,100 unique renewable project proposals that were submitted and represented about 283,000 gigawatt gigawatt year of forecasted generation and 91,000 megawatts of 4,000 of forecast capacity. We're basically oversubscribed. The total forecast annual generation from all unique bids submitted in our 2011 RPS represents over 4.5 times the total demand that we have to reach our 33% goals. Now that's where that viability issue comes in, because sometimes a well-priced proposal is not necessarily the most viable proposal. In Southern California, Edison has experienced this as much as we have. And under our RPS process, we do not see the actual pricing, the commissioners themselves. We approve the power purchase agreement. All we are given by an independent evaluator is the range that the bid has fallen into and its potential viability. And that viability will include whether or not it has passed its environmental requirements, be that CEQA or NEPA, and then of course its interconnections as well. And we are so oversubscribed that actually one utility that would have to remain nameless is not planning on having, or saying they're not going to have, a 2012 procurement for the compliance period beginning from 2017 to 2020. So a lot of RPS projects or developers, I would say primarily solar, even though we're seeing a lot of interesting wind projects, are coming west into California. These are just some of the key highlights of our RPS solicitation. We had 3,000 pricing proposals. This was up 250%. Only 2% of all proposals were actually shortlisted. So a lot of my time as a commissioner is dealing with sometimes very major, well-capitalized energy companies. I heard someone say on one of the public radio talk shows that America has to break the grip that corporate fossil fuel has, on us. Most of these major solar developers also own coal generation, nuclear, and other types of plants. There's just a lot of misinformation about energy. But a lot of my time is dealing with some of these very powerful global energy firms that want to know why they didn't make the 2% cut. And it's just the realities of the marketplace. And then there's also the issue of the delays. And as much as we try, I think Tom has done an amazing job on the federal side, and Ellen's point of the progress that they're making, particularly on these offshore projects, I will still take the position that government lacks a certain degree of sensitivity to risk capital. And a lot of times, all the investors want is an up and down vote one way or another, so they can move their resources to another state, another country, another sector if they intend to. So these are some of the challenges that we've had, and as I mentioned, I guess being overpriced is a good thing, or over-solicited, but along with the delays, I think it's creating a certain degree of disruption in the marketplace. I think much of this I've already pointed out. Basically what we have are an increasing number of companies chasing a decreasing amount of megawatts. Now, part of, as I mentioned, on the distributed generation side, we do have a proceeding before us that I can't really talk about, but it's net metering. And there is a proposal to change the calculation of the denominator so that we can raise the cap of our net metering to bring more rooftop solar into our distributed generation pockets. And that includes actually universities and community colleges and other participants in the solar market. There is a large degree of resistance from the utilities who have a concern that it's shifting the cost to those ratepayers that are not adopting solar energy. And as you know, utility regulators, what we basically do is socialize cost. That digester, that dairy digester, what we call poo gas in Fresno, may not reach your generation facility, but you probably paid for it, because that's how we're able to try to maintain low rates, even though California has some of the highest rates in the country. But I always look at the bills because of our very aggressive energy efficiency programs. This is the different mechanisms that we have to achieve our RPS goals, or the different transactional structures. One is our renewable auction mechanism, and that first auction was just launched in November, and these are for all technologies between 1 and 20 megawatts. We have our feed-in tariff, and this is another decision that is going to be voted on shortly, where we basically provide a tariff rate for those that are selling solar power into the grid from a distributed standpoint. We have our utility solar PV programs. Probably the most known is, which actually is not all photovoltaics, but that's our California Solar Initiative, which is probably our strongest legislative driver of solar installations, particularly on the distributed generation side. And then we also allow the utilities on both small and large-scale projects to engage in their own RPS solicitations, as well as bilateral contracts, and that again through the power purchase agreements that we approve of. you know, whether or not it falls under the Energy Commission or the CPUC, we vote on when it touches rates, and that's usually the power purchase agreement. So at some point, if you're looking for a ratepayer to pay for the development, it comes through the commission. I mentioned earlier, you know, something I could probably close with, and I support renewable energy. I believe in a diverse portfolio of energy sources. I don't think you want too high of a concentration in your states of any source of energy, because as we become more and more regionalized and globalized as markets, that source is going to be a commodity, and its price is going to be maybe pegged to a global price that you have little to no control over. Your petroleum at the pump is probably a very good example of that. But clearly, natural gas right now, shale gas, is the game changer. Kyle Rogers and I were both at the World Energy Forum on Regulations conference that was held in Quebec City, Quebec, and there was very little discussion on renewable energy. The discussion on renewable energy was largely how to utilize natural gas until we have appropriate storage technologies to firm and shape renewable generation. And in that article that I mentioned, that I wrote, that was what was basically my conclusion. I believe lower natural gas prices from this amazing technology called horizontal hydraulic fracking, and these amazing finds we have in the United States, the Eagle Ford in Texas, the Bakken Shale in North Dakota, which are bringing manufacturing back to the United States, which we all know is your major job drivers. This is actually having a positive impact on California's renewable portfolio standards, and I believe other renewable portfolio standards as well. So our AB 32 is going to bring us to the 1990 levels of carbon emission by 2020. That's the basic plan. We have our renewable energy credits programs, our RECs, which there are many generation projects that include natural gas or other fossil sources, but the green attributes can actually be stripped and sold. This is controversial in certain states because, in some of our regional states, because there are projects that are built purely to sell the RECs, but not necessarily the energy into California, and we're tinkering with that to try to get more normality there. I mentioned the governor's. But here's the thing about natural gas that I'll just say in closing. I know this is a renewable discussion, but just in relationship, Senate Bill 1368 by at that time President Pro Tem Don Parada, who ran for mayor of Oakland, lost because of something we have in California called ranked choice voting. He created a bill that said, which basically removed coal from the California generation fleet. Southern California Edison recently released their ownership in the Four Corners plant in Arizona. We do have some municipal utilities that still buy or are obligated to coal-fired generation, most notably LA Department of Water and Power, the largest utility, municipal utility in the United States, that has about a 39% now. But Senate Bill 1368 requires California emissions not to exceed emission levels which is actually 1,100 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. Natural gas falls below that. So when we use natural gas to firm and shape variable renewable sources, we're actually achieving the goals established by 1368. And AB 32 was before we had this technology, and much of our legislation is specifically designed to displace fossil sources and actually provides tax incentives and other incentives to replace fossil sources. But if you're going to keep rates low, which is my primary concern, I still believe, and I think all the regulators I work with believe, that natural gas will play that role. So California will continue to have an aggressive role in renewable energy. We'll continue to site large-scale facilities, as well as I think the major push, particularly in the solar area, is going to be rooftop and distributed generation, because that's how we can lift our cap and create more opportunities and load advantages for residents. So thank you for your attentiveness, and I'll turn it over now to Laura, who I'm honored to regulate her employer, but more importantly, they're a phenomenal company. If you've never visited Rosemead and gone to the Southern California Edison offices, I really encourage you to. They're just quite a very extraordinarily well-run operation. Thank you.